This is what you wanted. This is what you're gonna get. Is everybody okay? Having a nice day?
August 9th, 1986, was the night Freddie Mercury stepped onto the stage for the final time. His doctor had warned him. His voice was failing. His body was giving out, but Mercury refused to back down. However, what no one expected was the chaos that would unfold. What really happened that night? What secrets were buried in Queen's last concert? Today, we uncover strange facts about Freddie Mercury's final concert. Early life.
Everybody looks at me on stage and they think that's how I am, like arrogant, and that's the way I am. And when you look at me now, I'm quite boring, really.
From the very beginning, there was something different about the boy born as Farrokh Bulsara in Zanzibar on September 5th, 1946. His voice, his energy, his presence, it was as if he was never meant to be ordinary. But the journey from a quiet child in a British protectorate to one of the most electrifying frontmen in rock history was far from straightforward. His parents, Bomi and Jair Bulsara, were Parsis from India, and their roots traced back to the city of Bulsar, now known as Valsad. The family had moved to Zanzibar for Bomi's job at the British Colonial Office, but their son's path would lead far beyond the life they had envisioned for him. Born with 4 extra incisors, a feature he later credited for his expansive vocal range, the young Farrokh had a voice that would one day shake stadiums. But before that, he had to find himself. Much of his childhood unfolded in India, where he lived with relatives and began taking piano lessons at the age of 7. By 8, he was sent to St. Peter's School, a British-style boarding school near Bombay, where he earned a reputation not just for his academic abilities, but for his musical talent. He had an uncanny gift. He could listen to a song once and replay it on the piano, note for note. By 12, he had formed a school band, the Hectics, covering rock and roll hits from Western artists. It was here that a new identity began to take shape. Friends started calling him Freddie, a name he would fully embrace in the years to come. In 1963, he returned to Zanzibar to live with his family. But just months later, this chapter of his life ended forever. In the spring of 1964, as a violent revolution swept through Zanzibar, the Bulsaras were forced to flee. Thousands were killed, and the family had no choice but to leave behind everything they had built. They resettled in England, first in Hamilton Close, then in a modest home in Gladstone Avenue. It was an abrupt and difficult transition, but Freddie was about to step into a world where he would truly come alive. In England, Freddie pursued his passion for art, first at Isleworth Polytechnic and then at Ealing Art College, where he earned a diploma in graphic design. This talent would later serve him well, helping shape the image of the band that would one day define him. But at the time, he was just another young artist trying to find his way. To make ends meet, he worked at Heathrow Airport as a baggage handler and sold second-hand clothes at Kensington Market with Roger Taylor. He drifted through bands, Ibex, Wreckage, Sour Milk Sea, none of them quite the right fit. He was searching for something more. Then, in April of 1970, everything fell into place in ways he had never expected. Freddie joined guitarist Brian May and drummer Roger Taylor, stepping in as the lead singer for their band, Smile. A year later, bassist John Deacon joined, completing the lineup. But it was Freddie who would push them to reimagine themselves. He had a vision, and it started with a name. Against the hesitations of his bandmates, he insisted they call themselves Queen. It was bold, grand, theatrical, everything he wanted their music to be. However, around the same time, he brought another massive change into his life, something that would change how the world knew him forever. He left behind Bulsara and legally became Freddie Mercury. But Mercury wasn't just shaping a band, he was creating a legacy. Before Queen even released their first album, he designed their now iconic Queen crest, a logo that combined the zodiac signs of all 4 band members. The 2 lions represented Roger Taylor and John Deacon, the crab stood for Brian May, and the fairies symbolized Mercury's own sign, Virgo. A crown sat in the center, all of it overshadowed by a grand phoenix, as if foreshadowing their rise from the ashes of obscurity to legendary status. Everything was set. Now, all that was left was the music. And when Queen finally made their debut, the world was about to witness something it had never seen before. Becoming Queen. Even among rock's greatest legends, Mercury stood alone, his talent stretching far beyond the limits of ordinary performers. But what made him truly special? The answers lie in the details that shaped his extraordinary career. Despite his natural speaking voice falling into the baritone range, Mercury could effortlessly deliver most of his songs in the tenor range, hitting notes few rock singers dared attempt. His known vocal range extended from bass low F to soprano high F, with a powerful, almost supernatural ability to belt out notes up to tenor high F. That's already an impressive feat, but what made his voice truly unmatched wasn't just his range, it was the way he used it. Biographer David Brett once described Mercury's voice as escalating within a few bars from a deep, throaty rock growl to tender, vibrant tenor, then on to a high-pitched, perfect coloratura. One moment he was delivering raw, unfiltered rock. The next, he was gliding into a crystalline, operatic high. It was a skill few singers could master, let alone switch between so effortlessly. But just how rare was Mercury's ability? Even his fellow musicians were in awe. Spanish soprano Montserrat Caballé, one of the greatest classical vocalists of all time, once said, "The difference between Freddie and almost all the other rock stars was that he was selling the voice." To her, his technique was flawless, his rhythm impeccable, his vocal placement extraordinary. He could shift effortlessly between registers, finding the perfect nuance for every word he sang. Even in a room full of rock's biggest legends, Mercury's voice stood out. But what was happening on a technical level that made him sound so different? In 2016, a team of scientists set out to answer that very question. Led by Professor Christian Herbst, the research team analyzed Mercury's vibrato, discovering something astonishing. It was faster than that of most opera singers. What was even more surprising was that he had a rare ability to use subharmonics, a vocal technique that allowed his voice to resonate with a depth and texture no one else could quite match. To test their findings, the researchers even brought in a professional rock singer to mimic Mercury's style. No matter how skilled the vocalist was, he simply couldn't replicate what Mercury could do naturally. But Mercury wasn't just a singer, he was a songwriting powerhouse. Out of the 17 tracks on Queen's greatest hits, he wrote 10. And not just any 10. We're talking about Bohemian Rhapsody, Killer Queen, We Are the Champions, Somebody to Love, songs that have become anthems that are still played around the world today. And yet, Mercury never confined himself to just one sound. His songwriting was fearless, shifting effortlessly from rockabilly to progressive rock, from gospel to disco. One moment, he was crafting intricate, operatic rock ballads. The next, he was writing stripped-down, Elvis-style rock and roll. "I hate doing the same thing again and again," he said in 1986. "I like to see what's happening now in music, film, and theater, and incorporate all of those things." And perhaps the most astonishing thing was that despite composing some of the most intricate harmonies in rock history, Mercury admitted he could barely read music. He played mostly by ear, composing on the piano and instinctively building melodies that somehow worked every single time. But how? How did someone with no formal music theory background create songs as complex as Bohemian Rhapsody? Maybe it was raw genius. Maybe it was an unparalleled ability to feel music rather than analyze it. Whatever it was, it worked. But no matter how brilliant his songwriting was, there was one place where Mercury truly became legendary: on stage. He could electrify a stadium crowd with a single gesture, commanding tens of thousands of people as if he had them on a string. A writer for The Spectator once described him as a performer out to tease, shock, and ultimately charm his audience with various extravagant versions of himself. But even that doesn't quite capture the magic of a Freddie Mercury performance. Just ask David Bowie. The legendary singer, who worked with Mercury on Under Pressure, once said, Freddie took it further than the rest. He took it over the edge. And then, of course, there was Live Aid. The 20-minute set Queen performed on July 13, 1985, is still considered the greatest live performance in rock history. From the moment Mercury stepped onto that Wembley Stadium stage, he owned it. And then came the note, the powerful, sustained vocal run during the a cappella section that became known as the note heard round the world. Music executives later voted Queen's Live Aid set as the greatest concert performance of all time, with one critic writing, "Those who compile lists of great rock frontmen and award the top spots to Mick Jagger, Robert Plant, etc., all are guilty of a terrible oversight." Freddie, as evidenced by his Dionysian Live Aid performance, was easily the most godlike of them all. But even beyond the big flashy performances, Mercury had an eye for the small details. Take his signature prop, the broken microphone stand. It wasn't an intentional stage gimmick. During an early performance, he accidentally snapped a stand off its base and realized it gave him more freedom to move. That small, unplanned moment became an iconic part of his image, proving that Mercury's genius extended even to the way he held a microphone. Mercury performed in an estimated 700 concerts worldwide, each one bigger and more extravagant than the last. In 1981, Queen became the first rock band to play South American stadiums, shattering attendance records in Sao Paulo. In 1986, they played to 80,000 fans in Budapest, one of the largest rock concerts ever held behind the Iron Curtain. However, right beside his adventures with the band, Freddie had some intense things going on in his solo career. First solo album.
And satanic things. Why do they use Beelzebub? And I suppose that's a legitimate question.
Why do we use it?
Yeah.
It's just why do we use anything? It doesn't necessarily mean I study it.
Freddie's solo career was a bold experiment that took him from rock to opera and from pop to theatrical spectacle. But as always with Mercury, there was more to the story. Mercury's first solo effort came in 1972, under the unusual alias Larry Lurex. At the time, Queen was recording their debut album at Trident Studios, when house engineer Robin Jeffrey Cable invited Mercury to lend his vocals to two songs, I Can Hear Music and Goin' Back. The tracks were released together as a single in 1973, but Mercury's true solo journey wouldn't begin until over a decade later. And when it did, it was nothing short of fascinating. In 1984, Mercury collaborated with legendary producer Giorgio Moroder for the restoration of Fritz Lang's silent film Metropolis. The result was Love Kills, a high-energy, synth-driven track that climbed to the number 10 spot on the UK singles chart. It was a glimpse of what was to come, but Mercury was never interested in playing it safe. He was about to release a full solo album, and it would prove to be explosive, completely different from anything he had done with Queen. Enter Mr. Bad Guy, released in 1985. It was Mercury unleashed, his voice soaring over dance beats, lush orchestration, and dramatic ballads. Critics were divided, as some called it a bold, adventurous departure. Others struggled to compare it to Queen's rock-heavy sound. However, Mercury didn't care. This was his project, his vision. I won't be touring on my own or splitting up with Queen, he declared. Without the others, I would be nothing. Still, he was proud of the album. Years later, a remixed version of Living on My Own, one of the standout tracks, would go on to reach number 1 in the UK singles chart in 1993, earning him a posthumous Ivor Novello Award. But if Mr. Bad Guy raised eyebrows, Mercury's next solo project shattered expectations. In 1988, he teamed up with Spanish soprano Montserrat Caballé for an album that blended rock and opera, two worlds no one expected to collide. Barcelona was a theatrical masterpiece, filled with grand cinematic compositions and breathtaking vocal performances. Some critics didn't know what to make of it. One even called it the most bizarre album of the year. But the title track became a massive success, reaching number 8 in the UK and becoming an anthem in Spain. When Barcelona hosted the 1992 Summer Olympics, the song was chosen as the official theme, though Mercury had passed away by then, Cabaret performed it live at the opening ceremony, with Mercury's voice projected onto a screen. One last, hauntingly beautiful performance. And then, there was The Great Pretender. Mercury had always been a lover of theatrics, and in 1987, he covered the classic Platters hit, delivering a dramatic, almost self-referential take on the song. The single reached number 5 in the UK, and its music video, featuring Mercury in various costumes, playfully mocking his own image, became an instant classic. But was there a deeper meaning behind it? Some fans believe it was Mercury acknowledging the duality of his life, the flamboyant, confident performer on stage, and the more private, introspective man behind the scenes. Mercury's solo career wasn't just about his own albums, though. He was constantly collaborating, lending his voice to a wide range of artists. In 1986, he recorded 2 songs for Dave Clark's sci-fi musical, Time, and when the legendary Laurence Olivier heard Mercury's vocals, he reportedly said, "Now, my dear boy, there's an actor." Mercury was over the moon. He was also supposed to record with Michael Jackson, but after laying down demos for State of Shock, Victory, and There Must Be More to Life Than This, the project fell apart. Some say creative differences got in the way. Others whisper that Mercury's dislike of Jackson's increasingly eccentric behavior played a role. Whatever the reason, only one of their songs would see the light of day decades later, when There Must Be More to Life Than This was reworked and released on Queen's Queen Forever compilation in 2014. But then, there was his personal life, a subject surrounded by as much drama as his music. Personal life. Like everything else in Freddie's life, his love story wasn't conventional, and those who truly knew him saw a side of him the world rarely did. At the heart of his most profound relationships was Mary Austin. Before Queen even existed, back in 1969, Mercury met the woman who would become his greatest companion. She was 19, he was 23, and their bond was immediate. For years, they lived together in a small flat in West Kensington, building a life before fame changed everything. But by the mid-70s, Mercury was facing something he could no longer ignore: his attraction to men. In December of 1976, he sat Mary down and told her the truth. It ended their romantic relationship, but it didn't break them apart. In fact, their connection only deepened in a different way. Mercury bought Mary her own home near his, ensuring she would always be close. "All my lovers asked me why they couldn't replace Mary," he once said. "But it's simply impossible. To me, she was my common-law wife." And if anyone doubted his devotion, his will made it clear. He left her his lavish Garden Lodge mansion in Kensington, saying, "You would have been my wife, and it would have been yours anyway." But Freddie Mercury wasn't a man meant for solitude. After moving on from Mary, he immersed himself in a series of relationships that defined different stages of his life. In Munich, far from the media's prying eyes, he lived freely, exploring the city's nightlife and embracing his sexuality without restraint. There, he fell for Winfried "Winnie" Kirchberger, a German restaurateur who gave him a sense of normalcy amidst the chaos of fame. It was passionate, intense, and deeply meaningful, so much so that Mercury wore a silver wedding band Kirchberger had given him. In the liner notes of his album, Mr. Bad Guy, Mercury even thanked him for board and lodging, a quiet nod to their time together. Those who knew Mercury during those years described Kirchberger as the great love of his life in Germany, but their romance, like so many others, eventually faded. And then came Jim Hutton, the man who would stay with Mercury until the very end. An Irish hairdresser with a quiet, grounded presence, Hutton was unlike anyone Mercury had been with before. Their relationship began in 1985, and from the outside, it may have seemed like just another chapter in Mercury's love life. But this time, it was different. Mercury called Hutton his husband, and in 1986, Hutton gave him a gold wedding band, one that Mercury wore until the day he died. When Mercury's health declined, Hutton was the one who cared for him, staying by his side through the most painful moments. And even after Mercury was gone, Hutton carried their love with him, moving into the bungalow they had built together in Ireland. But Mercury's relationships weren't just about romance. His friendships were just as intense, dramatic, and unforgettable. One of the most legendary was his bond with radio DJ Kenny Everett. Their first meeting in 1974 set the stage for an outrageous, unpredictable friendship between two of Britain's most flamboyant personalities. Everett was the one who helped propel Bohemian Rhapsody into the charts, famously playing the 6-minute song 14 times in a single weekend on Capital Radio, despite the fact that it hadn't been officially accepted yet. Fans called in by the thousands, desperate to know when the song would be released. Everett and Mercury were inseparable for years, navigating fame, excess, and London's wild nightlife together. But, like many of Mercury's relationships, their friendship hit a rough patch. By 1985, they had fallen out, and their bond was strained even further when Everett was outed in his ex-wife's autobiography. It wasn't until both of them were older that they reconciled in 1989, proving that, no matter the time lost, their friendship had never truly disappeared. Then there were the friendships that lasted a lifetime. Elton John, a fellow rock icon, was one of Mercury's closest friends. Even in Mercury's final days, his generosity never wavered. Knowing how much Elton loved 19th-century painter Henry Scott Tuke, Mercury arranged for one of Tuke's watercolors to be delivered to him on Christmas Day, just weeks after Mercury had passed. But with all the love and loyalty Mercury gave to those around him, the world was always speculating about him. His sexuality was a subject of constant curiosity, whispered about in tabloids, hinted at in interviews, but never fully addressed, at least not in the way the press wanted. He didn't hide who he was, but he also refused to be defined by it. He wasn't interested in labels or explanations. The final concert. Freddie Mercury's final tour with Queen was the last time he would stand before roaring stadium crowds, commanding the stage as only he could. The year was 1986, and Queen had just come off their now legendary Live Aid performance, a show that had catapulted them into a new level of global fame. Fans were hungry for more, and Mercury, despite everything going on behind the scenes, was ready to deliver. With 26 shows across Europe, this was the band's longest and most ambitious tour yet. It took 4 weeks of rehearsals to perfect, a grueling process, but necessary for the spectacle they were about to unleash. Yet despite the massive anticipation, promoters were hesitant. Could Queen still sell out stadiums? Would fans show up in the numbers they needed? The answer came quickly. Demand for tickets skyrocketed, selling out venues almost instantly. The tour kicked off on June 7th in Stockholm, but things really started getting wild as it progressed. On June 21st, at a show in Mannheim, Marillion's frontman Fish joined Mercury on stage for a spontaneous performance of Tutti Frutti. But not every concert was smooth sailing. The July 5th show at Slane Castle, Ireland, was chaotic. Bad weather and crowd violence threatened to derail the event, but Queen powered through. A few days later, at Newcastle's St. James's Park, Mercury had to address the growing rumors that the band was breaking up. With absolute certainty, he denied them on stage, though looking back, it was one of the last times he would ever do so. Then came the biggest shows of the tour, 2 back-to-back nights at Wembley Stadium. The first night, July 11th, was met with heavy rain, but that didn't stop 72,000 fans from showing up. The demand was so high that Queen added a second night, playing to another sold-out crowd on July 12th. After Wembley, Queen made history yet again. On July 27th, they became the first major rock band to play behind the Iron Curtain, performing in Budapest's Népstadion to a sold-out crowd of 80,000. In one of the most touching moments of the night, Mercury performed an acoustic version of a Hungarian folk song, Tavasi Szel Vizet Arast, reading the lyrics off his palm. The audience was stunned. Then came the final night, Nebworth, August 9th. 120,000 fans gathered for what would unknowingly be the last Queen concert with Mercury. The stage was massive, 5,000 amplifiers, 8.5 miles of cable, and a towering 20 by 30 foot video screen. The show was electric, unforgettable. But there was one tragic oversight. Nobody remembered to film the performance. The only surviving footage comes from handheld audience recordings, though an audio version remains. Still, those who were there insist it was one of Queen's greatest shows of all time. However, at the time, nobody knew about the reality of the situation. Tragedy strikes.
I feel positively.
As early as 1982, Mercury had been experiencing unusual health symptoms. Reports suggest he secretly visited a doctor in New York to examine a suspicious white lesion on his tongue, a possible early sign of HFI. By the time Queen finished the Magic Tour, he had likely known for months, if not years, that something was wrong. Then, in October 1986, just 2 months after Nebworth, The Sun and News of the World reported that Mercury had undergone an HIV test at a Harley Street clinic. When asked, Mercury denied everything, stating he was perfectly fit and healthy. But privately, his partner Jim Hutton later revealed that Mercury was diagnosed with AIDS in April 1987. From there, the rumors grew louder. His increasingly gaunt appearance, Queen's absence from touring, and whispers from former lovers all fueled speculation. Yet Mercury and those closest to him remained silent. Even in 1990, at his final public appearance at the Brit Awards, where he looked noticeably frail, he still refused to confirm the truth. By 1991, his health had declined rapidly. The "These Are the Days of Our Lives" music video, filmed in May that year, showed a painfully thin Mercury, yet no one spoke of his illness. He still insisted on recording, telling Brian May, "Write me more. Write me stuff. I want to sing it, and when I'm gone, you can finish it off." By November, Mercury was confined to his home in Kensington. He could no longer leave his bed. His sight was fading. He refused medication, taking only painkillers to ease the suffering. And then, on November 22nd, he made one final decision. He called Queen's manager, Jim Beach, to prepare an official statement. The next day, the world finally heard the truth as he came out to say, "I wish to confirm that I have been tested HIV positive and have AIDS. I felt it correct to keep this information private to protect the privacy of those around me. However, the time has come now for my friends and fans around the world to know the truth." Just 24 hours later, everything changed forever. Death. On the night of November 24th, 1991, Freddie Mercury took his final breath in the comfort of his home in Kensington. He was 45 at the time, and in that quiet room, away from the cameras and flashing lights, only a handful of people witnessed his final moments. Among them was Dave Clark of the Dave Clark Five, one of Mercury's closest friends, who stood vigil by his side as he slipped away. The outside world had no idea yet. It was still just another quiet London night. Then, Mary Austin picked up the phone. With a heavy heart, she made the call that no one wanted to receive. She told Mercury's parents and sister that he was gone. As the news spread, it wasn't long before reporters got wind of it. By the early hours of November 25th, everybody knew. At his funeral, only about 35 of his closest friends and family were allowed inside. Among them were the remaining members of Queen and Elton John, all of whom had stood by Mercury throughout his final years. But if there was one mystery that would outlive him, it was this. Where did his ashes go? Mary Austin, the person Mercury had trusted most in his life, was the only one given the responsibility of handling his cremated remains. But she never revealed what she did with them. To this day, no one knows where they were laid to rest. Some Queen fans believe they are buried at Kensal Green Cemetery, marked by a simple plinth. Others think Austin hid them somewhere only she knows, as she once vowed she would take that secret to her grave. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.